Hello, my name is Laura Mimosa Montes. I'm one of the senior editors for the New York-based arts and literary magazine Triple Canopy. I'm thrilled to welcome you all today as the moderator for our event, Poetry Now, featuring Stephanie Rosenthal, Rachel Eliza Griffiths, and Paul Tran. I'm so excited to be in conversation with this accomplished group of writers and critics in celebration of Yayoi Kusama's newest book, Every Day I Pray for Love. Many thanks to today's hosts, David Zwirner Books, Academy of American Poets, and McNally Jackson, and all their staff for dreaming up what I imagine will be a very groovy time. We're also grateful to Ralph McCarthy, Hisako Ifshin, and Lisa Lowitz for their translations of Kusama's writings from their original Japanese into English. Also, thank you in advance to today's ASL interpreters, Hercules and Beth Staley, from All Hands in Motion. Before introducing today's guests and speaking a bit more about my personal fascination with Yayoi Kusama, a few brief housekeeping notes. Today's discussion will feature readings from Every Day I Pray for Love. A brief content warning. Some of these works discuss depression, mental illness, and suicide, so please take care should you find yourself triggered. You're otherwise welcome and encouraged to participate in today's discussion. Thank you. Also, I received that compliment about everyone's beauty. I'm feeling the beauty today. You're otherwise welcome, right, to encouraged to participate in today's discussion via the text chat function. Following the end of everyone's readings and presentations, we'll have some time for an audience Q&A, so please feel free to chat us your questions throughout the conversation. I think I'm ready now maybe for a little bit more personalized intro to Yayoi. Cue presentation. I think we're ready. So a few words about my fascination with Yayoi. I'm excited for today's conversation because it was actually through Kusama's poetry, and in particular, her book, Violet Obsession, first published in 1998, that I came to know her work as a visual artist. When I lived in New York, I often frequented the used poetry book section at Unnameable in Brooklyn to learn about experimental poetry. And when I saw Violet Obsession, I was struck by both the title and design of this unique book object, which features translations of Kusama's poetry alongside photographs of her earlier performance happenings and installation work. I was immediately drawn to the boldness of Kusama's vision and, yes, the obsessiveness in the work. And let's be honest, the phallic marine life like ocean imagery wrapping the book, her infamous soft sculptures, the intensity of Kusama's gaze on the back cover arrested me. There wasn't any other book like this in the store, and that's part of what I live for as a writer, reader, and book collector, to see something I've never seen before. Cue next slide. Here's the title poem, Violet Obsession, reprinted in Every Day I Pray for Love. So lucky for everyone who's joining us today, you get to have some previews of the book if you haven't seen it yet. If you'll indulge me, I'll read the poem, Violet Obsession. One day, suddenly, my voice became the voice of a violet, stilling my heart, stopping my breath. You're for real, aren't you? All you little things who happen today. The violets on the tablecloth break free and crawl over my body. One by one, they stick to me. Sumire flowers, violets have come to steal my love. The danger is growing, isn't it? Just standing there, inside the fragrance. Look, even on the ceiling and pillars, violets adhere. Youth is hard to hold on to. Oh, violets, little flowers, don't talk to me. Give me back the voice that became a violet's voice. I don't want to be an adult, not yet. All I ask is one more year. Please let me be till then. The line, you're for real, aren't you, cuts me so deep. I feel this question in Kusama's work, in her writing. The liveliness and playfulness in her vision is animated by this confrontation with doubt. Next slide. To face oneself through one's work while one is still alive to do it is a political gesture, a testament to life. This selfie, which I took in 2015 at the Walker Art Center here in Minneapolis, in front of Kusama's sculpture titled Passing Water, helped me imagine this possibility that we must stay alive to witness what we are and who we will become. That is what I see when I look at Kusama's work, and what I am reminded of in this painting, all the philosophies created by the universe. Next slide. The portals are there, and beyond the portals is the poetry. If we want to do the work that is philosophy, then we have to look to the universe to see ourselves mirrored in its magic. Close the presentation. So we'll be toggling throughout this presentation mode and speaker mode. And with that said, I'm so happy to be with you all here in this Zoomiverse, celebrating the work of this iconic artist. I'd like to finally welcome today's participants. It's my pleasure to introduce everybody. First is Rachel Eliza Griffiths, a poet, photographer, and novelist. Her recent hybrid collection of poetry and photography is Seeing the Body, out from Norton 2020. And her debut collection, novel, Promise, is forthcoming from Random House. Hi, Rachel Eliza.
Hi.
Welcome, so happy you're here. I'm asking everyone to indulge me in an icebreaker. Can I ask you, what are 3 words that come to mind when you think of the art and writings of Yayoi Kusama?
Sure, and it's so wonderful to be with everyone today celebrating Kusama's work. The 3 words I think of are intimacy, imagination, and the word like atomic.
Intimacy, imagination, atomic. I love adding these to my repertoire. Thank you. I hope we can return to them later in the discussion. Next, I'd like to introduce Paul Tran, the author of the debut poetry collection, All the Flowers Kneeling, forthcoming from Penguin in February 2022. Their work appears in The New Yorker, The Nation, and Best American Poetry. They are a Wallace Stegner Fellow in Poetry at Stanford University. Hi, Paul.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me.
Pleasure to have you. Can I ask you, what are 3 words that come to mind when you think of the writings and work of Yayoi Kusama?
Absolutely. I think of intensity. I think of indirection. And I also think of fun. I'll say more during my little segment, but intensity, indirection, and fun.
Intensity, indirection, and fun. Thank you. Next, I'd like to welcome Stephanie Rosenthal. As director of the Gropius Bau in Berlin, Dr. Stephanie Rosenthal has organized several renewed exhibitions, including Wu Tsang, There Is No Nonviolent Way to Look at Somebody, and most recently, Yayoi Kusama, a retrospective, A Bouquet of Love I Saw in the Universe. Hi, Stephanie.
Hello. So great to be with all of you, with all these great artists. It's a big honor for me. And I'm looking forward. Yes, very much.
Thank you for being here. And you're in Berlin.
No, I'm actually on holiday. So if you hear very familiar noises like kitchen things, it's because in the living room is the only space where I had good internet. So I told my whole family to stay out, but just that don't be surprised if there's like a weird noise and lots of cats around. So I apologize in advance.
We love cats. Can I ask you, what are 3 words that come to mind when you think of the art and writings of Yayoi Kusama?
Yes, it's passion, under the skin, and then I couldn't decide if it's love or pain. So let's go with love.
I'm writing in my notes everybody's words. There's a haiku in there somewhere, I think. Amazing. Thank you so much. I thought maybe before transitioning to the poetry part of our event with Rachel, Eliza, and Paul, we might first get into some of Kusama's work and history, and learn a bit more about the retrospective that's happening in Germany. How are you feeling about that, Stephanie? Yeah,
Very
cool.
good.
Great.
Let's go for it.
Yeah, let's transition to the slideshow again.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. So Kusama herself called the exhibition we opened now maybe 6 weeks ago in Berlin, A Bouquet of Love I Saw in the Universe. And it's actually also the title of a work we're going to see in a minute. And what was so amazing to work with Yayoi Kusama and also show this exhibition or open this exhibition in times like that, because we basically just coming out of the pandemic and closure in Germany. So it's basically the first show we're having up since 6 months, no visitors, no audience, and really being desperate to have people back. And to have her show is just somehow underlines what she really, it's like her work is a message to the world. It's a message to the universe. And it's so much about her giving and also giving love. And so I've always seen her work in relation to her writing, her life, her, you know, the kind of inside and outsides nearly of her personality. And what I think is quite interesting that she's one of the artists who, you know, has her work, but then also very often she even writes a message for her audience. And so we got this really beautiful email from her at some point where she said she'd liked us to put that right at the beginning of the show to welcome her visitor with her own words. And so she writes, I have devoted my entire life to the challenge of art, painting and creating every day. My art, my beloved art, is my infinite love for the universe. Its magnificence is still burning. My art, the best of my art, singing the beautiful love and splendor of humanity, which marks time until death and lives forever. I want you all to see it, to remember all of this moment, the mystery of the forms, the longing for the universe to which I have given my whole heart. So that's kind of this is basically that what you would read when you would enter the Gropiusbahn. We're showing works from her whole life, and she even has done 7 completely new paintings. So it is just a lot of kind of passion, really, I think, in the way how she works. And I now kind of seeing this new publication also, of course, in the way how she writes. And in her life, it has always entwined. I mean, she was always writing next to painting and drawing and doing her installations. And so if you go to the next slide, this is the installation, the new work she did for the Gropiusbahn. You see basically the center of the building, which is a 19th century building. And it's basically the heart of the institution, but also the people walk around it. And so she's done this work, a bouquet of love, you see in the universe with these polka dots. And there is this amazing poem she wrote, the Polka Dot Cafe, which we have on the next slide. And I think it really gives a good feeling of how everything she does really goes together and you can't separate it. I think she wouldn't separate her writing from her visual language, from her performative. Everything could be nearly read as performance or performative act, and how really life and art in her case blur together. And so she writes, to cover everything in a cafe with pink polka dots, that is my desire. Polka dots in the pink colored space fill everybody's heart with joy of everlasting love. In the universe, the moon and the sun are each just one of the polka dots. The earth on which will live and several hundred millions of stars all become pink by magic spells. Self-obliteration by polka dots. I'll call this Kusama's self-obliteration. My message I convey to you, my most beloved people, through my artwork is the joy of being alive, peace for humankind. People on this quiet earth where there are no wars. For these people, I will continue to offer my art. I will keep calling out to every person, love is forever, which is a message colored pink. I will keep communicating with you in the everlasting quietude of time. And so what I think becomes apparent in that poem is really that she wants to create or kind of make apparent a universe, her universe. And so I think what Kusama is really outstanding for is that her work is not just one painting or one infinity mirror room or one sculpture, but she really thinks in, having polka dots on cups, on bags, on. So I think it is this taking over, this really showing her way of seeing the world. And I think already when she was very, very young in 1942, she had her first hallucination and vision. And so it's really how she wants to see and what she experiences as this infinity. And so the few next slides we're having is to show how then this idea of self-obliteration and how this kind of approach to her art involved her own body, but also I think she really kind of puts herself in the position of us being in her work, being immersed in it, lying in it. And so what you see her is here on the left side is the Infinity Mirror Room. So it's the very first mirror room she did. And I mean, she was at that time, that was completely outstanding. And it was, of course, this amazing experience for people to going in to have these mirrored images of yourself. And at the time you were allowed, like you see her, like really stand in these fairly soft sculptures and lie in them. And I think that's also what I love about her work. There is this, it goes under the skin, it has a humor, but it also always has this extremely sexual, sensual feeling of just connecting with the body and at the same time disconnecting with the body. And so you see on the right-hand side where she's lying on the street, basically right in front of her studio in one of these panels from the work and completely kind of immersing in it. And the next slides were showing her works where she kind of continues this idea of being in it or kind of creating these works, these mirror room works where she herself put herself in. And very often, like in this work, like you see the install shot now on the left, you're not even able to get in, but it's this that she wants you to imagine to be in. I think that's also what she does with her writing, this amazing way of making you really go with her and imagine this other nearly borderless world or universe she wants to show us. And what I also feel, and if you go to the next one, I think we'll see that already. So she did this whole body of work, which she calls self-obliteration, did performances, films, collages, always that kind of engaging with creating a blurring line between her body and the work and her life. So that I think is always been her kind of idea of that self-obliteration she wanted to create. And so you see these amazing works here, which are the film stills from a film she did in 1964. So 1967, sorry. And was basically the continuation or kind of exaggeration of what she had tried before with her installations and works. So yeah, I think that's, and you see here an installation where she did it in Den Haag. One of the points of the show is really also to say that Kusama was very present and forerunning in Europe, showed here in the Res Gallery in Den Haag. And you see kind of how she herself was at the time engaged with these puppets and painted the body. And you see in the back still a video still. And I think it just feels the way how she, the paint comes onto the body, this real connection, this physical connection, which her work is so much about it. Yeah, now we're coming closer to the end, and it's again to show that the paintings, the very early paintings she did in the 50s, and what she's actually doing now in 2019, 20, 21, that it's nearly like a full circle in the way that how she engages, I think, with her work and with the world, and how much that actually connects to her poetry and writing. And now when you see the next slides, the titles are always beautiful and really talk about I think they tell nearly a parallel story to what the work does. And the one poem before about the stones, I think, is also sometimes you can really find, I think, a connection between a very concrete connection between her writing and the works. And this wonderful poem here is about a stone which gets lost, but it's in the center of this whole works. And so to the right, you basically see these two other works, which kind of have this centerpiece. It could be a stone. And yeah, maybe the last thing I want to say, because this conversation is not about her work, but just that her early work was really so surprising for me. It has this kind of quite, you know, when I talk about under the skin, it has a not a negative view, but it has this going dark, going under the earth. And I feel if you the newer works now, also sometimes you feel it's actually going under the earth, or under the skin, you cells, worms, but sometimes you have these eyes. And that's what for me is the fascination also for her writing, that she manages to have these different layers, and somehow they come up at different points, from the beauty to the pain to, you know, things we all, I think, live through ourselves, but how she manages to get this joy connected to a kind of feeling of, ooh, something, you know, suddenly flips. I feel that I was very impressed in now reading the poems again and seeing that it's there too. And I think that's what you also see in her works and in the exhibition.
Yeah, you know, everything you're saying, Stephanie, is making me think of the like scale, right, is an important part of the things that she's doing. And even just looking at this painting of hers, Every Day I Pray for Love, you know, like the microbiota, right? Like thinking of, there's the cosmic and the terrestrial and the extraterrestrial, meaning to say like the beyond, and these kind of scales of experience and feeling co-emerging and coexisting is very exciting, but also really disorienting. That's my experience of the installation work. And even seeing it reproduced in photographs. I was talking to my analyst about Kusama, and he said, what frightens you about the work? You know, and part of it is the disorienting aspect of it. And it's also thrilling. So grateful for this rundown, and congratulations on this exhibition.
Thank you. Thank you.
Why don't we turn now to Paul Tran? Super excited to talk more in detail about the writing and the poetry.
Of course. Michelle, can we get the next slide? Perfect. I do not do well with improvisation, so a girl has written out her 8-minute talk. I promise it will be delivered in an airplane flight attendant voice. So if it sounds soothing, it's only to cover the fact that it might be boring. Here we go. As early as 500 BCE, the thinker Simonides said that a poem is a talking painting and a painting is a silent poem. This asserts that poetry and visual art are intimately connected, and that their connection must achieve something that neither can do on their own. Such is the logic of what poets call ekphrasis, or the tradition of poetry inspired by art, and it's found in all the poems in Kusama's new book, Every Day I Pray for Love. For my part in today's celebration, I want to read and talk with you about one poem I loved in this book. The poem is Sleepless Night by the Window Pane on page 30. Sleepless night by the window pane. The drumming of a downpour against the glass door. The leaves of paper plants crackling. Oh, sleepless night. I need you to pass. The wind pierces my heart and moves on. Please, let me sleep. Oh, nature, my eyes are wide open and will not close. The inside of my head is cold and wet with raindrops. I ask you to let me sleep. What is it exactly? This mad mind of mine? Oh, raging storm outside. Calm yourself down, I beg you. This poem has two stanzas, two rooms, two mirroring forces in opposition. The first stanza begins with the rain outside, and like a camera of a movie, the speaker draws our attention from the rain to the plants, from the plants to the wind, and finally we enter the room where the speaker is trying to sleep. This movement from the vastness of night to the speaker, restless and alone, maps a journey inward, a journey from the external world to the interior of a person for whom the world is a distraction. In the second stanza, the speaker calls our attention to their wide open eyes and then to the inside of their head where their mind resides. Not only do we go inward, but we go from literal description to abstraction as well. The journey from the literal exterior to the abstract interior is, in fact, the journey of poetry. And I can say more about the making of this poem, how it begins in the indicative grammatical mood and shifts to the interrogative, how it begins as a dramatic monologue and then shifts to direct address. But I'd rather say this: most people think poetry is supposed to be beautiful. Most people think poetry is an act of self-expression, and I think poetry is neither. Poetry is what we cannot say. Poetry that is true is transformative and often ugly and menacing, and Kusama understands this. In this poem, the mind is not some beautiful interior. It's wet and cold with raindrops. It mirrors, as the two stanzas suggested the poem would, the rain outside. And when an object or aspect of the external world mirrors our emotional or psychological state, we call this in poetry the objective correlative. The objective correlative stands in for all that we cannot say, and it's the reason why the poem even exists. For this poem, the downpour, the rain, is Kusama's objective correlative. Like the rain, the desperation she feels inside her mind is intense. It's painful. It seems unending, but like the rain, the intensity will end. It will grow less painful, yet as it's happening, there's no way to know how much longer it will persist, how much worse it will get. And isn't this the experience of survivors? Isn't this the experience of anyone who has felt they alone must have to save themselves? Because of Kusama's biography, it's clear to me that the rain is not simply the rain. The night is not the night. And the speaker isn't a speaker asking for rest, but in fact, an end to their suffering. This is why this is a poem. And this is why Kusama, in addition to being a celebrated artist, should also be understood as a celebrated poet. Poetry is what we cannot say just as much as it is what we won't. Or poetry is what we choose to say in other words and on our own terms. When a poem seems more than what it is, when a poem suggests that an image or subject matter is representative of something else, we call this lyric indirection. And a facet of lyric indirection is the natural ambiguity of language to mean multiple things. Let's go back to the poem. For example, when the speaker says, "I need you to pass," is the speaker saying, "I need the storm to end"? Or "I need the storm to pass," as in pass on, pass away? Is this a poem about a storm? Or is this a poem about the speaker's own death? Or is it both? As a survivor of rape, I appreciate the lyric indirection in this poem by Kusama. The speaker doesn't make me relive the trauma she endured, but instead she describes how a survivor tries to survive, to remain in this world, and slowly to rebuild a life we can actually imagine living. Isn't this the definition of transformation? Isn't this the definition of transformative art? Art that serves a social purpose, art that might be synonymous to whatever little justice we can achieve for ourselves. I used to think that representation was enough. I used to think that I was a poet because I wrote about my past, my triumphs and tragedies, about the Vietnam War from which my family escaped to become new Americans, deceived by what we know as the American dream. I thought I was a poet because I wrote to rebuke such dreams and deception, to set the record straight about who we are and what has happened to us. But I was not a poet, and I'm barely a poet now. But what I can tell you is, at the heart of every poem must be the spirit of transformation. Just think about it. Every time you see a simile, you see that X is like Y. Saying X is like Y transforms object X into Y and makes it difficult for us to understand the properties of X without also understanding the properties of Y. This transformation results in the expansion of our imagination, and the expansion of our imagination makes us more human. The transformative power of a poem, which is to say the transformative power of language, resides in its capacity to make us more human and more human than we were before we read the poem. Am I being clear? Sleepless Night by the Window Pane by Kusama is a poem of transformation. And I hope that you, like me, feel more human now after reading and analyzing it with me. Okay, that's it. You're free.
Paul, what a lesson. That was a poetry lesson. Thank you. I'm going to be thinking about, lyric indirection and the connection between trauma and transformation, and poetry is what we cannot say. So grateful for this insight, and I know the audience is just eating it up. Thank you. Rachel, Eliza, can I invite you back, and maybe you can build on this and speak in greater detail about how you connect with Kusama's art and writings, and also share a bit about your own work, being that you're a writer and also a photographer.
Thank you so much. I mean, I just want to kind of sit in the feast of Paul's vision and clarity and intuition, and just my love for them is so full right now. And I think that fullness of love speaks to the very vision of Kusama, and that she has had this possession of a love that is beyond her and because of her, and that kind of space in each of us that is unspeakable and is both visible and unseen. I feel that really strikes kind of at the kind of things that make us so messy, that things are not neat, and yet Kusama can often present an order that is then ruptured by the history and the future in the present moment. And so I feel right now that I'm kind of, thinking about how poetry, Kusama and poetry, it's cellular, it's embodiment, and as I think Lara may have said earlier, it's disembodiment. But at the same time, you feel a close awareness of the universe. And when you think you belong to a name or a title, you get surprised, and that's stripped away from you in the most intimate and visceral and explicit ways. And it's a sort of language that we all have in our bodies, even if we can't speak them. So I'd like to read from Every Day I Pray for Love. And because I'm also a visual artist, I don't like to put too much analysis around the images and words in a certain kind of way. In my development, I've become a bit more stubborn instead of trying to explain it to you, because I can't. It's inexplicable. This is My Heart Aches So. When I walk the road, the grass becomes deeper and seizes my feet. When I say something, a dense fog appears over my mouth. How depressing. Even if I want to see flowers, they have already withered. Birds are flying in the sky, but their wings have been damaged. Rain clouds in the sky have gotten thick and scatter water on the earth. The water swells into a flood, causing me to shiver with fear. The flood that has aroused wind is sweeping over this world. All is vanity. All is vanity. No matter how much I think of them, flowers would never come back again to the earth. My life, too, is nearing its end. I am aging fast to my surprise. How many nights have I dreamed of love? How many mornings have I called for love? Everything was an empty daydream, like an illusion. Everything was just a fleeting dream after dream, and those vain thousands of millions of days. I slashed my carotid artery by myself. With tears filled with emptiness, I wipe off the red blood. I wipe off the red blood inside of my heart. And then I would like to read Beyond Art. And then after I do that, I will say a little bit about these different things, the repetition that happens visibly in Kusama's work, but also in language, and that sense of mystery or a kind of transformation, this word keeps coming, that happens in the repetition, in the chaos of the order of the design of the universe. And to think of Eliot's question, do I dare disturb the universe, that Kusama is so ferocious. And like Paul, like Kusama, myself being a survivor, being a queer person of color, the act of defiance and resistance to center your own order, your own body, your own people in a way against a vision and perspective that closes its eyes, literally shuts its eyes against your being and your right to be. So I want to read this kind of really beautiful, powerful poem called Beyond Art by Kusama. And I think there is an image that will come up, and it's just light and this word atomic, but also this intimacy and this infinity, which I think sometimes poets, our minds and our bodies may be sorts of messy infinity rooms, or so we like to hope. But the humble thing is that we are a very small speck in this room of light. Beyond art. Even before I was born, the shining art had been sending off sparks across the world. Why this whole body of mine symbolizes my living, and why it represents everything about my body and mine. I want to ask myself these questions, even after I have been led away beyond the universe by the body and mind born out of my body. I want to keep living today, tomorrow, and the days to come, carrying pieces called art that were left inside my body. By going through death and life, and leaping across the universe and the earth, just as I am doing today, I am determined to keep fighting even more vigorously, to the best of my ability and with all my might. I will keep fighting with all my might. And this, again, this invocation, one, the question, which I think is often the kind of spine for the poems that I return to, this kind of question where the question is much more valuable than any answer or any resolution, because you realize everything is so fluid, and that fluidity and Kusama's work, that she's not after the answer. It's the question. It's the kind of perspective off-centered. It's the collision of intimacy, of body, surviving what happens to us as children, as we come into ourselves in our ideas of what desire is, what our imaginations need, and what they then experience, and the kind of alternate realities that can all feel both honest but also illusions at once. And so I'd like to go to share finally a poem of my own, called Seeing the Body. And I feel that it's in conversation with Kusama's work. And I think we could cue up a photograph that I wanted to read. There will be 2 photographs that you'll see that I feel are explicitly connected to Kusama and a certain kind of space and identity I am also claiming in the lineage of what Kusama is pursuing with her work, which is one, love, but also the body, but also, you know, the laughter, the pain, the suffering, the desire, all of these things coming together and seeing through this dimension into something that is made up of particles. And the second slide you'll see from me is a photograph where it's a self-portrait. And very early on in Kusama's career, she wrote to Georgia O'Keeffe. And later in her life, she actually met O'Keeffe, but I feel that these 2 women have much in common. And the photograph that you'll see of mine is a self-portrait of me in a land rock formation that O'Keeffe painted frequently, but the kind of phallic structure of the rock, which is volcanic, like otherworldly, but you sense the presence of water. It's called La Plaza Blancas, the white place, and it's in it's just outside Abiquiu, New Mexico. And so I crawled into this kind of womb-like formation. And when I thought of Kusama, I thought that long before I met her in the landscape and in the earth of my body. This is called Seeing the Body. And this poem is a grief poem, an elegy, but also a praise poem of my mother, for my mother who died. Seeing the body. She died, and in the spring of her blood, I remember my mother's first injury. Surprise of unborn petals curling red, then dark around her wrist. Some fruit she cut, some onion, some body with skin and sharp seeds. She fed me. She lived us and I. She held we and I. She kept speaking with those flowers falling from her blood, taking her across the sky to death. I remember her voice like a horn I never want to pull out of my heart. In the next life, which is here and here, I gather every mouth that ever sang my mother's blues. She burned and she talked back hard at God. Oh, my mother, she danced unbroken to bale of grief on my back, opening into something black I wear. A life of flesh like a petal or fruit or burning. I've carried everything and I'm tired. My mother survived and but she did not live. She told me nothing and she was waiting the entire time. How does the elegy believe me? Together we crossed the sky. There was a gate and we walked through the world like that. She wrote we and she was last or never seen and brown eyes without life, opened her eternity when the air in her stopped and she was last seen dying. She was too silent for the first time in her life. The spring of my mother's blood hot, and God, the dark, dark, beyond the closed door that won't move again. And so I would just like to close my speaking to just place images and language together in a sort of lyric question for all of us to think about intimacy and the image of intimacy, and how is the language that we live that brings us closer to our humanity, but also can truly fail our humanity as well. Thank you.
Rachel, Eliza, thank you so much. This final image is a beautiful meditation to sort of end on. Yeah, I'm just thinking on that word of intimacy and collision, and this phrase, a very small speck in this room of light. I love thinking about us in this transfiguration. Maybe we can exit out of gallery view. And I think before we turn to audience questions, feel free to continue dropping them into the chat, and we'll get to them momentarily. I thought to start our kind of group huddle and return to some ideas that have been thrown out there is, I wonder if our panelists, featured guests, maybe want to talk a bit more about this idea of what we cannot say as appearing in the work. How do you relate to that, or how do you see Kusama manifesting the what we cannot say? Oh, and someone's requesting that I repeat your words to you. So as we think about the what we cannot say, I'm just going to throw out the words that we all shared in the beginning. So intimacy, imagination, atomic, intensity, indirection, fun, passion, under the skin, love.
I think just because of awareness of time, I think when you enter Kusama's world, again, there are boundaries, and yet she is open and vulnerable, I think. And so it's hard, speaking for myself, to kind of have a language for that vulnerability, because it's very fluid. It's not static, it's changing. It has its own kind of molecular structure. And it's reproducible in all of us, and yet it is very profoundly intimate and distinct for each of us how that happens, because each of us is carrying stories. I'm thinking of Paul sharing their comment about history, and particularly I'm thinking of American history, American lineage, and how to speak to that for people who look like Paul and myself, and someone like Kusama, who arrived on the scene in New York, and she was a woman and Japanese, and people really had time for her, and completely poached her work, and drove her to a desolate place. And how to articulate that through the praxis and architecture and spine of art. And it's like her work, everything is like a great profound spine. Here's a bone, here's blood, here's organ, here's mouth, here's breast, here's thigh, and it's a great body that she sees and imagines for all of us. And then what does that really mean when we unpeel that word love, to speak to that? Like, what is love for her? Is it something else she's actually asking, and we don't have a name or word for that? But love is as close as we can get to each other to even bear to look at what that might mean on our planet. So I'm going to stop there.
I admire everything that Rachel, Eliza just said, and I want to offer two brief answers. My first brief answer is, when I was raped at 21, I was told it was my fault. When I told my family I'm queer and trans, they said that's my fault. And as I think many survivors know, and as folks who go through the world with any sort of neurodivergence or mental illness. No, we're often told it's our fault. In the poem I presented by Kusama, she says, I'm begging you, the world, I'm begging you to calm down. And suddenly it's not something that is her fault. It's not something that she has to fix inside. It's the rain outside that must stop. Does that make sense? And so it's her way, I think, of saying, yeah, things have happened to me that have changed and shaped who I am, but those things occurred in the world. And so those things in the world need to stop. I am not a bad survivor for experiencing this. The perpetrators must stop. So that's one. And similarly to what Rachel Eliza said, I keep looking at this cover and wondering what the word love means. And actually, in Stephanie's presentation, in the message written by Kusama, it says something about to no longer experience the loneliness, the longing for the universe, the longing for the world. It's in, I think, the penultimate line. Is love when we finally stop longing to be part of the world? Is love the moment we finally step into a life we call ours? Is love something we give ourselves or something we ask from another to what? Be part of this world? To stop yearning and aching for it? I'm not sure, but I think the number of times I have seen longing appear in Kusama's writing, I have to believe that love and longing are somehow connected for her.
Amazing. Yeah. Thank you. Stephanie, anything you want to add on to this conversation around the unspeakable?
I think just that in her work, I feel what I feel she does to me when I'm in it is that there's so many different ways of experience and feeling it. And each time I go in, it kind of mirrors a lot where I'm at. So the kind of way how she manages with her language, on the one hand, to take things apart, like Rachel Lisa was also saying, you know, they have the mouse, you have the breast, you have the under earth, you have the over earth. But at the same time, she brings it all together. And it's this kind of inside and outside, the way that you can see cells, but at the same time, you can see stars, and how she kind of is able to sometimes flip the inside out. And on other days, you feel, no, she's actually flipping the outside in, and you feel like these things are living inside yourself. And so it's just amazing how I think she has all these different ways of actually, taking apart and bringing together at the same time.
Yeah, that inversion also complements the immersion that I think you're also speaking about in your description of the exhibition. I think now we'll transition to a couple of audience cues if everyone feels good about that. We might run a couple minutes over.
I just wanted to add to, like, Lara and what Stephanie was saying, just to tie Paul, myself, and Stephanie, and you, all of us who are together gathered. Like, I also want to highlight, like, Kusama's humor, but also she's very deliberate. I mean, she's very, ferocious. And so I think there's also a tenacity that's involved to say, I have the right to do this. Like, I can do this, and I have will over my body. I have will over my imagination. And to be, in her 90s and to sustain the discipline of resisting a dominant world. And, like, I'm thinking of Toni Morrison's, quote about, I'll wait for the center to come over to where I'm at. That has happened with Kusama's work. And so the kind of idea, I'm not sure, someone said fun earlier, but there is this thing of not forgetting the joy and the kind of delight that we find when we go into her rooms and her lights and her mirrors, and we see the pumpkins and we see these kind of, flowing structures. I think it's important to hold that kind of idea, like all these things can be true at once, and that simultaneous aspect, that this is all happening in the breath, like all of the systems and the body. And then speaking to what Paul was saying, that last line, mystery of the forms, I love that idea that Stephanie shared from her statement. So, okay, that's it.
No, that's amazing. I think the lightness is something, yeah, to carry with us, and totally recommend the documentary if you haven't seen it, as a way to get deeper into it. Thank you again. This conversation is giving me life. um, so an audience question. Let's see. One of the questions you received is, how does art influence poetry or vice versa? I haven't figured this one out for myself, as someone who sometimes takes refuge from poetry and goes to the visual art and sometimes performance to figure out a poetry problem.
And for me, in Kusama's case, it's really like two different, it's something which exists in the same body. It's just cells. And sometimes she goes this way and that way, but I wouldn't say it's influencing each other. And I also don't think it's describing each other. It's just one, passion of her, I think, to express something. I wouldn't say they're somehow, closely connect. They do the same thing, which I realize now also listening to all these great people, that that somehow it happens the same when you hear the poem and when you look at the work. So she manages that.
Rachel, Eliza, do you have any thoughts in terms of being a photographer, how you navigate, negotiate these terrains, which are sometimes, it's like a rhizome. They're not necessarily two distinct rooms, but just extensions of the same belief system.
Yeah, I mean, I can say when I was younger, I really tried to compartmentalize them, and like, here's where language happens and here's where, photography or painting or collage might happen. But that seemed really futile to do that. And as I get older, it is kind of messy and complicated. And so it's like, what am I trying to express and what's the best medium? And a lot of it is risk and experimentation and being like, this doesn't work. I mean, a lot of it is like, this failed, this didn't work. But the process, like the like putting the things together, and seeing the kind of almost byproducts too, where more and more I'm less concerned with the product of like, here's the poem on the page, but more like what dimensionality had to happen, what embodiment had to happen, what did I have to like live through or hear or witness for me to, feel pushed enough to explore language or image. Sometimes it's both things. I don't separate it anymore. I will leave the space of a novel in a different place because that's really not the same as poetry and photo, or like those poetry and art for me, like that can be together, but prose can't. Prose is like a different thing. It needs architecture and scaffolding and storytelling in a way that is less, for me, associative and lyrical. Like, I'm a lyrical photographer, I'm a lyric poet. But to the question of living, I would say, I don't live to write poems, I live. And if I write a poem, it can be coming from inside, its relationship, my like proximity to other people and their histories and their lineages and their wounds, and also like their joy and celebration. So I don't try to look for poems anymore. It's just like something that stays in me. And then it stays in me and it becomes, again, it's grafted onto me in a way that maybe I need language or an image to make it. So that's something I might say about that question.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question, and then we'll end. I really like this one, audience question. If you'll indulge everyone, what are your thoughts on the intersection between scale and passion in Kusama's work? So scale and passion. I can jump in and sort of say, like, in my experience of Kusama, since I maybe throughout that word scale of, I feel impassioned by the dissolution of myself in relation. I think this is what I love in entering her work, whether it's a sculpture. Like, I love that a sculpture can distort my own sense of relation to self, other, as well as past, future. I think that's also what excited me about encountering her work in a book object format first, rather than maybe the intended or original exhibition, installation, or happenings, as it were. I'm excited by, things like proximity, or as intimacy has also been suggested, that kind of boundary work gets fuzzy and can be fun as well as exhilarating. And that kind of passion of like, oh, if I start to orient myself in different relationality, to other, to space, to self, different narratives emerge, as well as different associations, and different orientations to time, future, as well as past. So that kind of is what brings me passion as I enter into her work.
I mean, I see what I feel like her passion, or Kusama's passion, I think carries her a long way. I think Rachel Lisa said that Kusama had a lot of humor, and I think she also had a really the confidence of saying, I want to take over. So this kind of idea of putting the dots everywhere, and having this the feeling this she has to do this, and this is she has the right to do this. I think this is the scale, because I think the scale in her case goes so beyond the infinity mirror rooms or the paintings. It really goes, it feels like she puts it everywhere she can. I mean, this is the way. And she did a show in '83 in a art nouveau building, where she really put her work, in cupboards, on kind of kitchen tables, on. So it was this idea of, oh, this is what she really imagines. And I love this, that the scale is actually that if you close your eyes and you hear the poems now read, it kind of is just everywhere. So this idea of you can suddenly go in this virtual Kusama world, which might even exist, and we just have to kind of believe in it. And I think that's I always like the scale I like to think about, and what she creates with her passion and her energy.
Thank you. Anyone else? Parting words?
I think I would just add a very small thing, is that, I think of perspective when you talk about scale. And when I think about poetry, poets choose often, scale is very deliberate. Are we looking at a very, very tiny moment that most people don't notice or can't see? Or are we the ones who don't look away? And then at the same time, we can zoom out and look at our, what we call, civilized world. We can look at the natural world. We can look at a kind of stellar, starry universe. And that can be part of our language and part of our vocabulary and part of our finding ourselves incomprehensible, and that utterance or desire to try to clarify or not even explain, but just to say, like, here. And I think in some ways the dots, it's the residue of, like, how many thousands of people do you come in contact with? You've left your cells on the pillow of a bed, you've touched a door, you've left yourself all over the universe as you're going through it, and then you'll leave, and so it's like she leaves and comes back and leaves and comes back and speaks to these flowers, this experience that she had that's very young. Those flowers, when she was a girl, they're still in her now, and we have this vision of what that was. But I mean, and that can be like, if you think in your own life, what are the major things in which you might stud the matter of your life against? Is it a death? Is it a great love? Is it a birth? Is it a great work? We get to see that made visible with Kusama. So
Thank you. I'm so going to take this with me for the rest of the day. And I'm just going to bring this memory with me now every time I turn to Kusama's work, whether it be in print format or in an exhibition. So with that said, I'm going to close with a thank you to all of our brilliant participants, Rachel, Eliza, Paul, and Stephanie. I've so enjoyed connecting with you all and appreciating Kusama's work in this fashion. Thank you again to our ASL interpreters, Hercules and Beth. At this time, we'll be dropping into the chat a link to purchase the Kusama book, in addition to information about the other titles by today's speakers from McNally Jackson's website. And lastly, if you're in Berlin or plan to be, I'm very jealous, but be sure to visit Kusama's retrospective at the Gropius Bau, which is up through August 15th. And if you're in New York, Kusama's upcoming exhibition of new works at David Zwirner, which opens June 17th. Thanks everyone for joining, and until next time.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.